Hello. I want to welcome everyone here. My name is Bill Schneidewin. I'm the director of the Alan D. Levy Center for Jewish Studies at UCLA. And on behalf of the Alan D. Levy Center, I'd like to welcome everyone here. This lecture by Dr. Karen Covello-Paran. Karen will be speaking on Crossroads of Culture, the Jezreel Valley in the Bronze and Iron Age. I'm particularly excited to have Karen here because Karen is the co-director of the Tel Shaddud excavations, where I'm associate director, and UCLA is starting a brand new project this summer with this new project of Tel Aviv University and the Israel Antiquities Authority. And this is a fantastic collaboration. We have a couple UCLA undergrads, a couple UCLA grad students coming this year, and we're planning on, hopefully building on this project. I was there in 2023 to scope out Tel Shaddud, see whether this is the kind of place that I wanted to bring UCLA students for, what kind of facilities were at the excavation, what kind of directors. I didn't actually know Dr. Covello-Paran at the time. I was really absolutely delighted with everything about the excavation. We'll learn a little bit more about Tel Shaddud as part of the Crossroads of Cultures in Galilee today, so I won't go into how exciting I think this excavation is. But I'll just say a couple of words about Dr. Covello-Paran. One, she's an unbelievably delightful person. So it's always fun to work with people who are good people. But also she's a scholar of great quality and integrity. She's one of the leading scholars for the study of the late second millennium, early first millennium in Israel. Her specialty especially is in the Galilee region, where she's conducted a number of excavations, and she serves as a senior archaeologist for the Israel Antiquities Authority for the Galilee. I'd also like to point out that there are a number of sponsors for this excavation. The Levy Center is one of the sponsors. We have a new sponsor, Mr. Ginsberg, Lev Ginsberg here. There are other people who are sponsoring the excavations, and hopefully will build more philanthropy for the study of archaeology and ancient Jewish civilization in the Levy Center in the coming years. And I look forward to this collaboration as being, a beginning of that those endeavors. Finally, I also want to thank the Levy staff. Viv and Chelsea and David and Reina for helping facilitate this today's event. And I'll take the moment and remember to silence my cell phone. Let's see. Don't want to interrupt you, Karen. And please join me in welcoming Dr. Karen Covello-Paran today.
Thank you so much, Bill, for that generous introduction and for the kind invitation to speak today. I'd also like to extend my sincere thanks to Chelsea White and the entire team at the Levy Center for their support and hospitality. In this lecture today, I'll explore the enduring importance of the Jezreel Valley, both as a fertile agricultural zone and as a strategically critical corridor in the ancient Near East. The valley's rich soil sustained civilization, animal husbandry, and horticulture, and these resources were systematically harnessed by imperial powers, from the Egyptians to the Kingdom of Israel, through systems of redistribution, taxation, and territorial control. This afternoon, I will share with you the findings from two archaeological sites, Horvat Tevet and Tel Shaddud. These sites are closely interconnected. The findings from salvage excavations at both sites has sparked a multi-year interdisciplinary research initiative currently in progress at Tel Shaddud. In other words, bear with me throughout the presentation of Horvat Tevet, and you'll see why our excavation project at Tel Shaddud is a game changer. But first, these research projects, wait, I think this is like too close to me, that I will present are the results of collaboration and partnerships. All of these partnerships and the projects themselves began with trial and salvage excavations conducted prior to modern development. Some people believe that every square inch of land in Israel contains ancient remains, but that's really not true. However, due to the high potential for archaeological remains, any construction activity in Israel, whether it involves ground penetration or not, must be approved by the Israel Antiquities Authority in accordance with the Antiquities law. If preliminary tests like surveys or trenches, this is connected, indicate the presence of antiquities, a trial excavation is carried out. This limited excavation helps determine the depth, preservation, and nature of the remains, estimates the site size, and assesses the resources needed for full excavation and documentation of everything that will eventually be destroyed. So in the upcoming slides, I just want to show you some of the significant archaeological discoveries, just a few slides, that often result as byproducts of modern development. Roadworks, construction, infrastructure projects, such as this excavation at Nachal Rimonim, just a few kilometers from Tel Megiddo. Here you can see an elite burial, Middle Bronze Age 3, but also there was an earlier potter's workshop at the site, and revealing settlements, tombs, and material culture that otherwise would have remained hidden. Today at this site at Kfar Kama, directed by Omar Zidan from the IAA, again, salvage excavation, and now there is a parking lot at this Cherkessian Heritage Center. There are also sites that sometimes stop modern development, although this is very rare, such as the Manot Cave, and it was found in the Western Galilee during the construction of a new neighborhood for a small community, and where the arrow is the original opening of the cave that was found totally by chance while digging trenches for a sewer line. Yeah, it's a wow picture. The most important find in the cave is a partial skull cap of a modern human that indicated modern humans were present in the region at the same time as Neanderthals. Moreover, the research supports the idea that the two species may have interbred. This is one of my favorite excavations at Jalame. It's a site between Afula and Jenin on the border crossing. And here we excavated an ancient cemetery that began 4,000 years ago in the Intermediate Bronze Age and was reused throughout all phases of the Middle Bronze Age. And here you can see on the left a burial chamber with burial offerings that were waiting for us for about 3,600 years until the development, again, of a new border crossing. We have at least 30 scarabs from this tomb. Observe in the upper left that when we arrive at these sites, often at sites that we've never heard of before, it's frequently after some destruction has occurred. In fact, individuals from the neighboring village started walking around with large intact vessels, and that's how we knew about the destruction. At a site, Har Yonah, on the outskirts of the Nazareth Hills, for example, we had a series of 5 expeditions, again in tune with the modern development, and today this entire site, there is a neighborhood of high-rise buildings. These salvage excavations have become a vital tool for understanding human history, though they have often been carried out under time pressure and logistical constraints. Often over the course of years, these salvage excavations have contributed vastly to our knowledge, and especially in areas that had seen little prior investigation. They frequently uncover overlooked aspects of daily life, rural activity, and marginal landscapes that fall outside the scope of traditional research agendas. The seemingly arbitrary location of our excavations, according to the modern development, brings many surprises, and this is a site of Kishon in the Lower Galilee, which has been excavated intermittently for over a decade. In yellow is the place where I just recently excavated, like 2 months ago. This is the largest excavation of any settlement dated to the Intermediate Bronze Age in the entire country as a result of widening the road. Radiocarbon dates from this site derived from carbonized grave pits have helped refine the absolute chronology of the end of the 3rd millennium BCE in Israel. And just to show that there are some surprises, last month I got a call saying that a tomb was discovered 5 meters from where I had just excavated. So I just excavated in blue and said to them, we are done, you can build. You can carve down into that bedrock for 8 meters and start building the overpass. And you can see exactly where the red star is on the left. It turned out that for over 100 years, cars drove over the top of this tomb. And it was only when we removed the modern asphalt and we started to carve away there that we found an opening into a rock-hewn tomb, multi-chamber tomb dating to the Intermediate Bronze Age. And here you can see the metal conservators that are carefully extracting the well-preserved bronze weapons, and you can also see the storage jar. This is from 4,000 years ago. And this is the first time I'm sharing these photos with any of the burials, especially this one, of a 50-year-old female with a unique bronze belt at her shoulders. Can you make out that long strap? A pottery jug, and note on the right that the string wrapped around the javelin, and she was also buried with weapons, is preserved, as do most organic materials when next to metal. She also had a long staff, wooden staff next to her, because we found interspersed about 4 bronze rings that had evidence of wood in them. And finally, the dilemmas that we face in the field of salvage archaeology are many. The cave from Kishon does not exist anymore. An overpass will soon take its place. But sites such as the largest Roman legion camp in the eastern Mediterranean are the subject, as we speak, of a fierce debate over their destruction. And this leads me to Horvat Tevet. Here you can see the location of the site in the northeastern margins of the Jezreel Valley. This is the Kesulot Valley, and it's one of the subregions of the Jezreel Valley. And it might be too hard to make out, but the site is actually paved over. Horvat Tevet offers new insights into the eastern Jezreel Valley. This site provides a rural perspective that aids in interpreting not only the valley, but also the interactions between the local and non-local polities during the Middle and Late Bronze Ages, the Iron 1-2A, and finally, the complexities of the 7th century BCE, the Iron 2C. Here you can see just the process from surface survey, what will be destroyed in the course of building this new road, and then the trial excavation in 2011 and 12. And again, you can see all of the squares in the trial and salvage excavations on the right. And just very quickly, the first time I arrived at this site was the same day that I was told, start erecting the campsite and you need to put up a greenhouse because it's winter. And that's how we excavate in the winter. And this is where you're going to put the squares. And I'm doing as I'm told, but I started to look around and it felt like decades of experience just came together, and I said, you know what? I don't want to put the squares there. There's a small mound over there, and I saw a large stone block sticking out. It wasn't very obvious. And I got permission to move the squares, and those squares hit right in the center of this pillared building that you see here on the left. Again, so those squares hit right where we now know that there was a major destruction and a royal Israelite estate. The scale of destruction was striking, and everything was orange. The debris was orange from the heat and intensity of the fire, making it clear that I had uncovered an historical event. And the research of Tevet, including the initial trial excavations and large-scale salvage excavations, is directed by Dr. Omer Sergey of Tel Aviv University and myself, and this is a joint research and publication project of Tel Aviv University and the Israel Antiquities Authority. What I'll present today on both Tevet and Tel Shaddud is the result of that ongoing partnership, and I'd like to thank Omer for his collaboration. He's speaking now in Germany on the same subject. And some of our research was partially funded by the Gerdel Henkel Foundation. And I would like to thank also Professor Hannes Betzel from Jena and all of our other partners in the project. Horvat Tevet is a small site located in the northeastern margins of the Jezreel Valley. It's about 15 kilometers north of Tel Megiddo and 27 kilometers northwest of Tel Rehov. The site extends over 3 terraces, here marked upper, middle, and lower, and slopes down to the northern bank of Nahal Tevet at the foot of the Hamoreh Hill, and it enjoys a strategic vantage point overlooking the ancient routes that connected Egypt in the south and also the Beit Shan and the Jezreel valleys with the Galilee Hills and with the Akko Plain. It was first identified in the Survey of Western Palestine in the 1880s as Khirbet Bir Tibas. And here you can just see, some of the excavation areas. Successive salvage excavations exposed over 8,000 square meters of the site. That's huge. Our excavation revealed 10 distinct occupational layers stretching from the Middle Bronze Age through to the medieval period. And what stands out is that only in the late Iron IIA, approximately from 900 to 750 BCE, does the site begin to show signs of a more public character. The earliest excavated phase of occupation consists of a single architectural complex on the lower terrace that we have identified as an isolated roadside temple/sanctuary/shrine. Why isolated? Well, the extensive excavations of more than 320 excavation squares on 3 terraces permits me to state that during the late Middle Bronze Age and the Late Bronze Age, there are no domestic structures at the site. This shrine is the sole architectural feature of the site during this period. This complex is comprised of a central hall, 5 rooms, and a courtyard, and an enclosing temenos wall. And you can see from the photos that the building sort of exhibits irregular construction. It doesn't look very monumental. And the walls were field stones and thick crushed limestone floors. But because we are confined to modern development, we could not extend the excavation beyond those borders. So that can be quite frustrating. And here holding the chalice is Yoav Tzur, who directed the excavations on the lower terrace prior to the drainage channel for a new road. One room, why a sanctuary, why a temple? One room apparently functioned as a favisa, and the entrance was sealed. And piled in the room's center and along its walls were more than 50 pottery vessels, mostly for serving, together with a large amount of faunal remains and burnt deposits. Collectively, these finds are associated with feasting and drinking, conspicuous consumption. Additional votive offerings and objects, such as a stamp seal, are most likely connected to gift-giving. Although the initial construction may have begun in the terminal phases of the Middle Bronze Age 3, the complex was ultimately abandoned in the Late Bronze Age 1. And residue analysis. In the photo on the left, you can see Dr. Ayala Amir collecting samples for organic residue analysis. And this method will help us determine what kinds of liquids the vessels once held, and even what type of oil was burnt in the lamps. You can see the soot marks. I marked it with a red arrow. The shrine's location on the lower terrace supports the interpretation as an isolated roadside sanctuary, but wasn't independent or under control of perhaps one of the near urban centers at Megiddo, at Shimron. At the same time, in rural areas throughout the country, not just in the Jezreel Valley, we see growing wealth during this period, and this connects to that tomb that I showed you from Jalame with all of those beautiful finds in situ, those storage jars. We start to see more imported pottery from Cyprus and an overall increase in finds. And also the temple fits into a broader pattern of rural sanctuaries that are also found during this period. So this is not an isolated case. Similar shrines we know from Nahariya, from Mevurach to Al-Walaje, and also from the Lachish Vase temple. After the temple was abandoned, the site remained unoccupied until the Iron One period. The Iron One settlement represents the first of 6 distinct occupation layers from the Iron Age. These layers span from level 8, dating to the Iron One, up to level 3, which corresponds to the Iron 2C. 4 of these levels, levels 7 through 4, date specifically to the late Iron 2A period, and it is during this time that the site features a series of public buildings and experienced 2 major destructions, one at the end of level 7 and another at the end of level 5. Horvat Tevet remained abandoned throughout the Iron 2B, and when the settlement resumed during the Iron 2C, the Jezreel Valley was under Assyrian control based at nearby Megiddo Stratum 3. On your right, you can see a rare cremation burial from this time. This impressive burial included beautiful offerings such as this faience bottle, and interestingly, it was found in an area that we said that there is no reason to excavate there. We had already seen the bedrock all around, and it was only because we had to excavate because of the road, and we had to have total exposure of the bedrock that this burial was exposed. It was, you think of how many other examples there could be of, like I said, it's arbitrary. The earliest Iron Age occupation at the site is dated to the Iron One, the 11th, early 10th centuries BCE, and there are scanty domestic remains on the upper terrace, rock-cut pits on all 3 terraces. Horvat Tevet was a small and relatively poor rural village during this time, and the main source of data comes from the cemetery located at the highest part of the site. Over 25 burials were excavated in 3 expeditions, and here with the red arrow you can see the gas line cut the cemetery, and that's where the excavation was. This slide just shows the varying densities and spatial clusters of the graves. All the burials at Tevet were simple rectangular oval pits. Some had one rounded end where the head was placed. These are shallow graves. They're about 30 centimeters deep, some a little bit more, and typically they had a single interment. A single person was buried in there, laying on their back in an extended position. As you can see in this group photo, the burial offerings include typical Iron One forms: bowls, dipper juglets, flasks, ridge necks, jars, chalices, and lamps with pinched spouts. And by analyzing these ceramic forms alongside additional grave goods, and when available, the anthropological data, we can begin to shed light on Horvat Tevet during this period. In particular, the composition and origin of the burial offerings provide clues about local production, patterns of consumption, and possible economic ties with surrounding communities and regions. Together, this material allows us to consider not only social and cultural aspects, but also the site's integration into a broader economic network during the Iron One. One burial, F3 in area D, stood out from the rest. It was an L-shaped pit with a niche on the northern side, creating an overhanging rock ledge that partially concealed the interment. The adult skeleton was very poorly preserved. But what really sets this burial apart is the richness of the grave goods. The deceased were buried not only with twice as many offerings as the other graves, but also with a more diverse array of goods, suggesting a more elaborate funerary ritual. Notable are the 4 anklets, 2 on each leg, highlighted here in green, if you can make it out over there. These anklets were small, which suggests that they were worn by an individual, likely a younger female, and they were worn into over time. In other words, the thickness of these anklets, and there's no way that an adult foot could be put into those anklets. And so we have evidence, and according to other ethnographic parallels, that they must have been placed on females. Whenever there is data from the anthropological data, we know that it's from females. And somehow, as cruel as that sounds to us right now, that's how we interpret this. The lead to isotope analysis shows that the copper came from Timna more than 300 kilometers south of Horvat Tevet, and burying several of these rare anklets was a deliberate, visible display of social prestige and wealth, especially in a cemetery where most of the graves were very modest. And these anklets and this burial clearly reflect emerging wealth differences within the Iron One community at Horvat Tevet. Like I showed you from the preserved string on the bronze javelin from the new tomb at Kishron, also at Tevet there are preserved remains of linen shroud on the anklets. The adult was wrapped in a shroud that covered the anklets. Beyond the ceremonial aspects of the shrouding of the female, the linen sheds light on social economic ties between Tevet and the Tevet inhabitants and the Beit Shan Valley, which was the center for linen production during this period. 13 vessels in the graves contain traces of heated beeswax. Beeswax mixed with animal fat was used as fuel material during burial ceremonies. This combination suggests rituals involving fire, pleasant aromas perhaps, creating light, and perhaps framing the face of the individual. This supports growing evidence that beekeeping was a significant part of the economy in the Beit Shan and eastern Jezreel Valley during the late Bronze II to the Iron II period. The chemical profile of the Tevet beeswax resembles that of the Tel Rehov beehive. Although the Tel Rehov apiary, the oldest ever found, is later than the Tevet cemetery, I will say that there are indications for on-site beehives at Horvat Tevet, but this research is still in initial stages. Just another slide of the vessels that had beeswax and animal fat. So Horvat Tevet, Iron One, was settled by a kin-based local group with minimal wealth and social hierarchy. Its burial practices reflect Iron One traditions in the Jezreel Valley, and though Tevet was integrated into the regional exchange with the Beit Shan and eastern Jezreel Valleys. Following the abandonment of this village, it is during the late Iron IIA that there's a shift in the layout, the function, and the societal status of Tevet. It's during this period that Horvat Tevet functioned as an administrative center of a royal Israelite estate, and a series of monumental structures were built on the ruins of the Iron One village at the site's summit. The first monumental pillar building at Horvat Tevet level 7 was constructed on the upper terrace and measured about 20 meters in length. And here you can see the two upright monolith limestone pillars. Every place where we reached this level, we had a thick lens, a thick layer of destruction debris, very violent destruction. But ultimately, Horvat level 5, represented by a second monumental pillared building with designated production and craft specialization areas, is archaeologically the most substantial phase of occupation observed at Tevet. The primary feature is the large pillar building 5000 that was erected, like I said, at the site summit and consisted of 4 main units. You can see there's a central hall divided by 2 parallel rows of monolithic stone pillars. You can see them on the right, the eastern entrance hall and a western entrance hall. Also, there was a massive casemate-like structure that was built against the escarpment of the upper terrace. It seems that it functioned as a reinforcement to support the southern wall of this building. Its state of preservation is remarkable. The walls were preserved to 1.5 to 2 meters high. It's remarkable. I can't think of any other word. To walk through the halls of this structure was truly magnificent. The walls were constructed of huge, semi-hewn white limestone blocks. All floors of the building and the courts surrounding it were paved with flagstones or cobbles. The conspicuousness resulting from the topographically elevated location of Building 5000, coupled with its size, plan, materials, and construction, strongly suggests its public nature. You can see that in the western entrance hall, which we consider to be the main entrance, there was an in situ 4-horned altar. On the middle terrace near Building 5000, our Area C, there are at least 2 additional structures, one containing over 15 in situ smashed storage jars, hippo storage jars, and nearby was a vertical updraft pottery kiln. There's evidence for food production and 70 loom weights. Yet no clear domestic structure, no house was discovered in this area. And here you can just see another nice slide of the loom weights. On the lower terrace, areas F and G, a single occupational level corresponds with both of these monumental pillar buildings. This level includes over a dozen stone installations for olive oil extraction and additional pottery kiln. The lower terrace thus appears to have functioned as a specialized area for processing agricultural commodities during the period when the monumental pillar buildings adorn the summit of the site. And I hope the color does justice to the red burnt bricks. So Building 5000 was destroyed in a fierce conflagration, evident from the massive burnt brick collapse and high temperatures noted by heat alterations on the building's stones and the stone pillars. Large chunks of brick superstructure of the walls collapsed and again fired to bright red and orange. So who destroyed Tevet? Here the exact sciences came to our aid. According to historical sources, Hazael, king of around Damascus, led at least one military campaign to the southern Levant, and according to the Hebrew Bible, he destroyed Gat of the Philistines. A recent paleomagnetic study conducted by Yoav Vaknin synchronized the destruction of Horvat Tevet with that of Gat at around 840 to 830 BCE. And these destructions are attributed to Hazael. The violent destruction of Tevet attests to its importance, its representation of Israelite rule in the rural hinterland of the Jezreel Valley. And with all due respect to Hazael, the centralized role of Horvat Tevet is evident also already from the archaeological evidence, the architectural planning, the prominent visibility of the pillared buildings in the landscape, and the material culture all underscore the site's importance within the regional framework. These features strongly suggest that Tevet was connected to and likely operated under a centralized political entity. The destruction is just icing on the cake. We suggested that Horvat Tevet was the administrative center of an Israelite royal estate spanning the late 10th century and into the last third of the 9th century BCE. The overall storage capacity at Iron II-A Tevet was clearly seen in the large number of storage vessels. Large quantities of hippo and cylindrical whole-mouth vessels goes well beyond what a local community would need. This tells us that the goods stored here weren't just for local use. They were part of a broader distribution system. So the real questions we need to ask are, what exactly was being stored at Tevet? Where did these goods come from? And just as importantly, where were they going? Fauna analysis offers important clues about what was produced and stored at Tevet. What stands out is the exceptionally high frequency of cattle remains, about 50% of the total assemblage. This is unusually high, especially compared to contemporary late Iron II-A sites in nearby valleys. Most of these cattle were used for agricultural labor, not for meat. Only a small portion of the herd was slaughtered for consumption. This pattern strongly suggests that Horvat Tevet was engaged in large-scale field cultivation, likely producing grain on a regional scale. In short, the livestock profile confirms the site's role as an agricultural hub in the late Iron II-A. Specialized exploitation of sheep and goat for wool and dairy production. The animal bones indicate a producer-focused strategy. Females were kept for past 4 years for wool and dairy, unlike the consumer-oriented slaughter patterns at sites such as Tel Rehov and Tel Megiddo. Horvat Tevet is the only late Iron II-A site in the Jezreel and Beit Shan valleys with clear agro-pastoral strategies. It functioned as a producer site, not a consumer one, supplying meat, wool, and dairy, likely distributed to nearby regional centers. Numerous stone installations on the lower terrace, and we already saw them, indicate large-scale olive oil production. And this is supported by the study of the charred wood that shows that 85% originated from olive trees at the site. The production relied on raw materials brought from the surrounding area and clearly exceeded the local needs. In other words, Horvat Tevet functioned as a major producer site for grain, meat, dairy, wool, and olive oil. Grains were likely cultivated in the fertile fields. Herding took place on the slopes of Hamoria Hill. And these activities were overseen by the central authority at Horvat Tevet, which also collected, stored, and processed these products as needed. The scale of production, the centralized storage, far exceed local needs, indicating that they were all redistributed to regional urban centers. And we saw this pattern also from the cylindrical whole-mouth vessels. About 260 whole-mouth vessels were uncovered at Tevet 7-5. Their distribution is limited to the late Iron IIA period in northern Israel, indicating specific elite-controlled function. And in this study, we proposed that the cylindrical whole-mouth jars were produced under elite demand for grain storage and redistribution. When found in large numbers, they are never scattered in the sites, and they're always clustered in central storage facilities, usually adjacent to monumental structures. At Megiddo, over 70, and next to Palace 1723, at Tel Jezreel, 45 next to the fortified gate. But in Horvat Tevet, there were 215 of these jars. They were most likely stacked, from how we found them, in a single room in the monumental building at Tevet. And this is just from Tel Rehov to show the entire size of these buildings, of these jars. These findings emphasize the important role of Horvat Tevet in a centralized storage and distribution network. A forthcoming study by Ortal Haroush, we're also working on the same questions regarding the hippo jars using 3D modeling, computation analysis, and petrography. And these distinctive storage vessels, found mainly in the Jezreel and Beit Shan valleys during the Iron IIA, reflect a system of centralized control under the Kingdom of Israel. This study reveals a structured production framework with skilled potters working in a limited number of workshops under administrative oversight, indicating also in this aspect coordinated manufacturing and redistribution across centralized network. Here you can see the path from the Beit Shan area to Horvat Tevet towards the Akko Plain, and apparently skilled potters organized within a unified social structure produced these jars and supplied the administrative centers. And Tevet emerges as a key site in this network. If I summarize Tevet, we see that it is the heart of a complex economic mechanism with both production and interconnected with a redistribution system meant to control the flow of agricultural wealth from the Jezreel Valley. This included the cultivated fields, herds, olive orchards, specialized pottery production, and a storage and redistribution apparatus. Horvat Tevet shows no evidence of a stable, locally rooted community. Instead, it functioned again as a as an administrative complex. There are no homes there. We see that the burials ended at the end of the Iron I period. There are no burials there. People did not live here. There were not all aspects of society did not take place at Horvat Tevet. We reconstruct that there was corvée labor, and this leads us to the El Amarna. If the late Iron IIA Horvat Tevet functioned as an administrative center of an Israelite royal estate, responsible again for production, collection, redistribution, note that the Egyptians already employed a similar system of redistribution in the same exact region during the late Brian's 2 and 3. During most of the Late Bronze Age, Egypt directly controlled the southern Levant, requiring local rulers to pay tribute and provide labor for royal estates. By the 14th century BCE, Tel Beit Shan functioned as an Egyptian garrison and administrative center in the Jezreel and Beit Shan valleys. The El Amarna letters identify the Jezreel Valley as Egyptian crown land cultivated by local labor to supply grain to Beit Shan and possibly part towards Akko. These estates were near Shunem, in modern Sulam on the outskirts of Afula. Horvat Tevet lies only 3.5 kilometers north of Shunem, and if our interpretation is correct, it shows that more than 200 years after Egypt's withdrawal from the Jezreel Valley, its eastern area continued to serve as royal land. Did the kingdom of Israel inherit its royal economy from the Egyptian imperial system established in Canaan? In other words, we see a similar economic mechanism operated in a similar vein from the exact same rural hinterland. Continuity and patterns of land use and royal economy from the Late Bronze 2-3 Egypt to the Late Iron 2A Israel. The northeastern Jezreel Valley played a key role in the royal economy and was crucial for maintaining political control in the region. And now we reach Tel Shaddud. See the red star. And the spoiler is that we believe that Shaddud is the location of an Egyptian royal estate. Now, considering that the holiday of Shavuot is next week, I thought it fitting to show this photo from 1939 that shows the mound of Shaddud in the backyard of the kibbutznikim of Sarid. I say this as a kibbutznik. Community outreach in the Jezreel Valley, and specifically with Sarid, is very important to our expedition. Tel Shaddud is located in the northern edge of the Jezreel Valley, just east of the Kishon River at a key crossroads. It connects the main east-west route from Beit Shan Valley to the Alko Plain and to the north-south route from Tel Megiddo, which you can see in the photograph. The site is mentioned in Thutmose III's topographical list and is identified as biblical Sarit from Joshua and Judges. Salvage excavations. First of all, Shaddud consists of a small mound or a tell about 2 hectares and a lower settlement on the lands below the tell. Until recently, only salvage excavations were conducted below the tell. Theoretically, tell mounds are off limits to developers, theoretically. In July 2023, we began the first excavations on its summit, opening a new chapter in understanding this site's history. Salvage excavations yielded important information about Tel Shaddud. The salvage excavations demonstrated that whenever large settlement emerged at the site, it was situated below the Tel, EB1B, Iron 2 BC, Hellenistic Roman periods, and during the Middle Bronze 1 and 2A, the area below the Tel was used as a burial ground, which means that during this period, the settlement shifted and was confined to the Tel. And you can see how just by plotting all of the salvage excavations, we can then come forward and understand the borders of the settlement during the different periods. The site was first settled in the early Bronze 1B period when a relatively large and complex village was founded at the foot of the Tel near the spring of Ein Shaddud. And we know from the excavations that this village actually had quite a low density of a built-up area and was basically scattered structures of a very large area. The periodic flooding of the site may have contributed to its abandonment, and this particular excavation is buried below a road leading to one of the factories nearby. Sometime during the Middle Bronze 1, about circa 1950 BCE, the settlement shrunk in size to the confines of the Tel and was probably fortified. The areas to the foot of the Tel began to be used as a burial ground for a long period, and MB1, again MB2, LB2 into Iron 2A. And I must admit that these burial grounds were the key factor in our choosing this site for a research excavation. The shift to the summit of the mound during the MB1 through the Iron 2A reshaped the landscape in a manner that suggests fortification and the emergence of a local elite. And Tel Shaddud stands out as the only site in the Jezreel Valley exhibiting continuity and burial practices from the late Bronze Age 2 to through the Iron 2A, whereas many other sites in the valley saw cemeteries abandoned after Iron 1, just like I showed you from Horvat Tevet. At Tel Shaddud, not only were burial traditions preserved, but the cemetery also expanded in the Iron 2A, and this implies that the site was settled continuously from the time of Egyptian rule in Canaan until the formation of early monarchic Israel. Here you can see the mound of Tel Shaddud and how it commands over the lower lands. It's about almost 30 meters high, and the red star was where we found two very poorly preserved burials as far as skeletal remains and accompanying pottery offerings, yet two very well-preserved weapons provide the only evidence to date for the beginning of the cemetery during the Middle Bronze 1 and signifying what we expect to be the initial occupation period of the mound itself. But one of the most remarkable, important finds from the salvage excavations is the clay anthropoid coffin, whose provenance was in the Beit Shan Valley, dated to the late Bronze Age 3. This burial is significant toward identifying social complexity within the site. This burial explicitly mirrors distinct Egyptian burial protocol, yet it was conspicuously placed in a cemetery together with local burial traditions. Next to the single anthropoid coffin burial, note probably, and according to the excavators, they think that they saw the edge, the base of another anthropoid. Again, we're not able to continue the excavation because of the border of the gas line. Next to the single anthropoid, there were additional 3 pit burials in local tradition, and I'd like to thank Dr. Ron Berry for the photos and additional data from the excavation. I could have spoken today only about this burial, but due to the lack of time, I will just show some highlights. The coffin contained a single primary burial of a single male aged 50 to 60 years old, carrying a bronze dagger on his right side and wearing a scarab set in a gold-folded ring on his left hand. The petrographic analysis of the clay indicates that this coffin was manufactured in the Beit Shan region, again, which was an Egyptian administrative center during the 18th and 20th dynasties. The burial is informative toward interpreting rituals enacted during the funerary process. Here you can see some of the offerings that were placed with the deceased inside the coffin, and similar to Tibet, we have evidence again of shrouding in linen due to the preservation, again, on the medals, on the dagger, and on the overturned bronze bowl. The roll of beeswax resurfaces, and not only was the entire coffin coated with beeswax, but similar to Tibet, it was also found in vessels together with animal fats. And here you can just see that, the list of the ritual offerings that were found on top of the coffin and in the pit in which the coffin was laid. And the list is endless of meat offerings that were part of the funerary ritual, and you can see the location of the bovine skull that was placed on top of the coffin. Just a few of the pottery burial offerings next to the pit burials. The sickle below the head of one of the burials is also an Egyptian tradition. The burial protocol, therefore, at Tel Shaddud can be compared to those present in the partially contemporary cemetery of Deir el-Balach, situated on the coast within the Gaza Strip and located about 200 kilometers south of the Jezreel Valley. Tei Beit Shan and Deir el-Balach are burial grounds for Egyptian soldiers or officials. Note the plans of the Egyptian garrisons from these sites. Where there are anthropoids, there is always an official Egyptian presence. According to the DNA evidence, the individual buried in the coffin was local Levantine and not Egyptian, and also those in the pits, and there was no kinship relations between them. In any case, the presence of the anthropoid coffin suggests that the local elite in Tel Shaddud interacted with Egyptian authorities and perhaps was related to the Egyptian royal economy in the valley. This is a graphic summary of the settlement patterns at the base of the Tel, showing the extended use of the cemetery, also in the Iron 2A. And now we reach the new dig. Now, we formulated a new research project whose first stage is the excavations of Tel Shaddud, the mound. The apparent continuous occupation throughout the discussed period, from the LB2 to the Iron 2A, together with the presence of the clay anthropoid coffin, makes Tel Shaddud particularly suitable to provide new insights into the rural hinterlands of the Jezreel Valley in changing political landscapes. Omer and I are happy to add the logo of UCLA to this page, along with the joining of Bill as Associate Director. In 2022, we embarked on a survey season to determine the location of the excavation areas, and there is nothing like walking the site every day from crack of dawn and breathing in the view to get a feeling for the site, sort of like Horvat Tevet. Here you can see just another review of the survey season, including the finding of a stamped Rhodian handle of an amphora. The Haganah archives provided information regarding the strategic role of Shaddud throughout millennia. Control of the road, both defense and offense, was proven by the trenches dug in the top of the Tel during the British Mandate period. You can see, you can make out the trench. In the first season, we opened 2 areas with specific research agendas. And here are just some, I think, Crystal, you were in that photo. Just some photos from the first season, just so you can see the excavation. In Area B, was located at a strategic point that overlooks the primary ancient roads, the one to Megiddo, and also overlooks the burial site of the anthropoid. And here you can see Area B Supervisor Asaf Weiss and his assistant Guy Brandis. And the stratigraphy from this area exhibits Middle Islamic refuse pits, Mamluk period, that cut into architectural remains of domestic Roman period structure. And here Johanna, one of the students from Bochum, is pointing to the place where a lamp and a coin hoard were found. We've already reached the Persian period remains as well as potsherds dating from the late Bronze Age, which show that we are digging in the right location. Here you can see some of the coins from the hoard. And Area A, supervised by Ofer Naveh and Nimrod Katsir, was specifically positioned to document and date what we think will be successive fortifications and provide the stratigraphic profile of the mound itself, in other words, all of the periods. Some observations on the stratigraphic sequence of Shaddud so far, we can see that Tel Shaddud Area A already reflects the imperial rule in the Jezreel Valley. And again, we dug some of that trench that was dug from the British during the British Mandate period. I would say unfortunately, but it's also informative. And here you can see some of the bullet casings that we found in the trench, from those trenches that you see on the upper left. And here you can make out the shape of the trench on the right. Below a Mamluk and possible Crusader structure, we've exposed what appears to be a Roman period fortress. We're looking for late Bronze Age and iron, but we also have Roman. Shaddud is on the Legio Tzipori Imperial Road. That's marked here in yellow, and it's visible from the Roman camp of the Legion, which I showed you in the beginning of the lecture that we're fighting about to preserve. Here you can just see on the left, marked in green, the walls. The architectural remains of the late Iron Age, the 7th century, the time of Assyrian domination in the region, and the Persian period are in the initial stages of exposure, but see this beautiful Akhziv-style figurine in real Phoenician style. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And here you can see the area supervisor offered by a floor with a Persian mortaria. So we're actually reaching the levels that we want to excavate. And in summer 2024, we excavated, unfortunately, only for a week, but this week provided us with concrete evidence of a massive fire at the site, a conflagration dated to the late Iron IIA period. Do red and orange bricks ring a bell from what we saw in this lecture? Can you make it out? Can you see the color red? I'm not sure if you can make it out. This is the color of brick burnt in a very high temperature. And here you can see the modern, I don't know if you can make out, there's a modern trench from modern Israel that cut into the destruction from the Kingdom of Israel, from the destruction layer of the late Iron IIA, and we like to coin this view from the Kingdom of Israel to the State of Israel. Whether this destruction is by Hazael is to be determined in excavation season 2025, and we expect to excavate this destruction layer in July, and destruction layers, as we know, are actually a jackpot for archaeologists. The 12th century BCE waved hello to us through the scarab. So in Area A, we are reaching very significant remains that connect us with the chief research goals of this project. At Horvat Tevet, research has shown how imperial administration was rooted in local landscapes through infrastructure and coordinated resource management. Building on this, ongoing work at Tel Shaddud aims to trace both continuity and change under different ruling powers, ideally through a sequence of fortresses that reveal evolving strategies of control and presence over time. We are planning on excavating the site for about 6 to 7 seasons, and season 2025 will take place throughout July. We thank our staff, partners, and the many volunteers and students that have and will participate in the excavation. A special thanks to our associate directors for joining us in this incredible journey of discovery. And thank you for your attention and for bearing with me in a very telegraphic and fast presentation of the project. Thank you.
Thank you for a really exciting lecture and a really exciting new project. And I open it up to questions from the audience. Look.
I got a quick question. Maybe a few, but in order. What's that body of water?
It's a water reservoir, and below that water reservoir, there are excavations of Iron I and Iron IIA burials, and also actually starting before that, early Bronze Age domestic structures. So when I said that in the early Bronze Age the structures were scattered over quite a large area, we know that also from that, under that, the reservoir, and also Roman, Hellenistic and Roman finds.
So before that reservoir was put in, the Antiquities Authority looked into underneath it, and you have all the documentation of what was beneath what's now water.
So yes, it was excavated by Dr. Avner Rabban, Zichrono Livracha. It was excavated in 1970s and early 80s. And everything that, I won't say the entire reservoir was excavated, because there are always constraints when we are doing salvage excavations. But we have documentation, and most of it has been published, and yes. But they did not do trenching. Today, when we go to investigate sites, often, we know where there are archaeological sites, where there are antiquities, but there are also projects that are at the border of ancient sites. And even in ancient sites, we're not always sure about the preservation. So we do not want to go into the logistics of erecting a huge excavation project unless we are sure that there is something there. So when people say, how do you know there is something there? I say, well, we wouldn't come here to dig if we didn't know that there was something.
Professor Carter?
Yes, thank you for your talk. I wonder if you could describe in little more detail the terracing of the site of Horvat Tevet, because everything else seems to be a tell. And is this a common site formation? Are the terraces built? How big are they? What was the communication between them?
That's a great question, and that exemplifies the role of rule sites that are not tells. And that exactly a site like Horvat Tevet, they're natural terraces. It's a natural formation. There's only where I said that the building had a casemate structure that was sort of like reinforced that terrace between the upper terrace and the middle terrace to make it just more majestic. However, the site of Tevet, the fact that it's not a mound, it is not a tell, means that it probably would not have been a project that we would look to get funding for to go and excavate, because most of the research agendas, and I showed that with the salvage excavations, most of the research agendas from universities and joint projects, and like we're doing at Tel Shaddud, we're looking for the monuments, we're looking for the temples, for the fortifications. And so when you have these very rural sites, they often get overlooked. And so it is only because the road, because they were looking to make it so that I would have to drive 10 minutes less to get to my office, it bypasses Afula. That is why that site was actually even exposed. And in the surveys in the 1990s, there was a survey, part of the Archaeological Survey of Israel, where every 10 kilometers there's a map of all the archaeological sites. They claimed, it was written there, that there were large blocks and that were probably dated to the medieval period. And it's only with the excavation that we know that those blocks were Iron 2A. So I hope I answered your question.
Yes.
Yes. In the periods when you marked it as destruction periods, were there natural destruction elements to it, or was it always attacks from other human beings?
The high fire and the expanse of the structure and the high temperatures, this could not have been natural. This was an intended destruction, and we know that there are other destructions from this period in the region. So this is a period where we see destructions at major sites, and then we see it at the site of Horvat Tevet, and that was one of the reasons that we saw that there was emphasis on the very strategic role of this site during the Iron 2A. Now, where the pottery production area is, and where we had those loom weights, that area did not show signs of destruction. So it was very intentional, just this major administrative structure.
Yes.
You mentioned the Persian period. What historically are you looking at as far as timing for that?
So, at Tevet or at Shaddud? Both sites. So what we have, first we have from Horvat Tevet. At first, in the trial excavations, I will say that I didn't mention it here, but we have above this the rubble of the destroyed building of the Iron 2A. We saw that there was a cemetery. This is very intentional. We now date it to perhaps Mamluk Ottoman periods, okay, somewhere in that range. But in the initial trial excavation, I was sure that that cemetery was Persian. We know that from other sites such as Tel Michal and in this central part of the region of Israel, that often we have Persian period cemeteries that are exactly intentional above remains of, destruction remains or on tel mounds on the summits. At Tevet, we have like the late Iron 2C, and we sort of slash Persian. So we're looking at very early, like on the cusp between Iron Age and early Persian. We don't have a lot of material except for the cremation burial. And at Shaddud, right now we think it's also right at that transition between late Iron and the Persian period. So we have the 7th century, and so we're looking at perhaps the 6th century. And then at the other end of that span, we have transition between perhaps Persian and Hellenistic period. So we don't have enough of well-sealed loci that would give us a more exact dating of that yet. But we expect to have that because at the 1-week excavation, we already had a floor with that mortaria, Persian period mortaria.
Professor Burke?
Karen, thank you for a lovely talk. It's very illuminating to see everything. For Tel Shaddud in the Late Bronze Age, are you reconstructing that this would be either, is it going to be an rural agricultural estate like, why am I blanking? Yuval Gadot's
And a fic.
Or is it going to be a fortress, a roadside fortress like, say, Tel Mor?
We would be happy with both. I think the clue really is these anthropoid coffin. Wherever you look, and I didn't, like I said, I could have given a whole lecture just on the funerary rituals. Just think that they made this coffin in Beit Shan, and what did they do in the meantime with the body, and how did they prepare it, and there's many processes there, but wherever you have, so I did not show also all of the exact parallels showing the Dir el-Balach burials, and you take the Shaddud burial, the exact, it's like identical, it's so identical, not just the way, the position of the coffin, what was placed above it, what was placed inside of it. These are set burial protocols. And whenever you have those coffins, like at Beit Shan, like at Tel Balach, you have some kind of Egyptian garrison. So think of Tel Beit Shan. But Tel Shaddud is much smaller than Beit Shan. We discussed this over lunch. It's a very small site. But because it's a small site and because of its strategic location, I think that we are going to find Middle Bronze Age, Late Bronze Age, Iron Age, Persian, other periods. I think that we will see a series of, I just say fortresses in a generic term, as a generic term. So I can't elaborate any more until we continue excavating.
Thank you so much for the interesting talk.
Thank you.
Have you found at Tevet, or do you anticipate at Tel Shaddud to find any writing on any of the artifacts?
Yay!
Considering the administrative role that we think of Tel Shaddud, we are really hoping that we will find it. It's still rare in Israel during these periods, but we're really, really hoping and praying that we will have, absolutely.
You have one cuneiform tablet that you showed. Was that not from the site, but
it wasn't from? That was just to give an example of the cuneiform tablets from the Elamarna archives. Yes, I didn't write that up.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yes.
Going back to the Middle Bronze Age tomb at Kishron, I believe you said, has this tomb been published anywhere?
The Intermediate Bronze Age tomb at Kishron, no, because I just excavated it 2 weeks ago. I've been busy.
Do you have any other examples of women buried with weapons at the site?
Yes, there are many. In the Intermediate Bronze Age, first of all, in the northern part of the country, it's a very regional period. So in the northern part of the country, the tombs are always multiple interments, like we saw at this tomb, and you find a vast array of weapons also that are buried with females. There's another huge cemetery that's being excavated right now in the central part of the country, in Neve Ephraim, Yehud it's called, and they have been excavating hundreds of tombs, albeit the tombs, they are single interment tombs. In other words, there's the shaft tomb, these are all shaft tombs. A shaft, like a chimney, leading down to an entrance into a single chamber there. In the north, there are always multiple chambers. So we know that from Yehud, when the physical anthropologist came to the field, And I also questioned that because I was sure before he came that that was a male because of all the weapons. And what we really had in the tomb, we had a single, look how we have misconceptions until we have the evidence. What we had in that tomb was a single male, on both sides of him, women, and on two elevated shelves, and one of them was that woman, again women. This woman was especially unique, that belt strap around her shoulders somehow. And so we're going to look at, again, what do we want to see if we see evidence of linen or some kind of shrouding of the individual. We already saw, just in the field collecting it, that there was wood, so we could see the preservation of organic remains, but no, this has not been published yet.
And, yeah, and we're looking for the inscription that says Devorah or Yael, right?
At Shaddud.
Right.
Oh, there. Because that also connects to Tel Shaddud.
Right. Shaddud is actually mentioned probably in Judges 5, so it would be quite. Let's take one last question. I saw. Yes. Yes.
I was going to ask: is finding pig bones, is that significant, or does that kind of imply that it wasn't a Jewish area?
First of all, I was just thinking pig bones because the only animal offerings that I had at the Intermediate Bronze Age tomb was actually a pig jaw, but that's another subject. But we would. I think that first of all, I think that we will find pig. But also the question is, what is the role of Shaddud during the Roman period? And if we have evidence of a Jewish population at the site, and there is a Shimon, we do have, the stone cups, we have evidence of Jewish presence in the vicinity. I don't have anything.
Determined.
Yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me.